pilot shortage. That's the thing that we have been hearing about for the last 5, 6, 7 years. But in today's day and age, I have tons of friends and coworkers that can't find jobs. I also know that on the market are thousands of CFIs that also can't find jobs. So what is it? Is there a shortage? Is there a surplus? How is 2026 going to be any different? That's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into it, I just want to say a very quick thank you. October was an incredible month for me and this channel. I got my airline class date at the beginning of October, and about a week ago, this channel hit 5,000 subscribers. So with all that being said, I want to keep this ball rolling, and you'll probably notice the hideous, horrible, awful mustache on my face. So throughout the entire month of November, I want us to raise money for the Movember Foundation. They are a charity that is all things men's health. The one that I put the biggest emphasis in is they are a charity focused on men's mental health. So I want to keep this good ball rolling. If you're interested in donating, I think that we could raise $1,000 for them. The link is going to be down in the description and the first comment. Also, on top of that, we'll probably be posting a couple extra videos and maybe even some charity live streams later this month. All right. That's enough of that. Let's get into the video. The outlook for 2026 jobs is very interesting. For years, headlines have warned of an unprecedented pilot shortage, with airlines scrambling to hire and offering sky-high salaries. Analysts once projected that 2026 would see the largest gap between pilot supply and demand, a shortfall of 24,000 pilots. Major U.S. carriers announced ambitious hiring sprees to combat the crisis. American Airlines planned to hire 10,000 pilots in 5 years. Delta Airlines set out to add 1,000 pilots annually through 2026, and United initially said that they wanted to hire 10,000 new pilots this decade. The message was clear. Becoming a pilot was supposed to be a golden ticket, virtually guaranteed by an incredible demand. But reality is often more complex than the hype. Fast forward to late 2025, the landscape has started to shift in unexpected ways. Recent U.S. data suggests that the pilot hiring frenzy is leveling off, bringing the market closer to normalcy. In the first half of 2025, major airlines hired 2,190 pilots, a sharp drop from the hiring spree of 2022 and 2023. Instead of accelerating into 2026, hiring has relaxed to more sustainable levels, prompting experts to call it a normalization of demand. Even more surprising, forecasts that once pegged 2026 as the peak year for pilot retirements have been revised. The largest retirement wave is now expected in 2031, not 2026. In other words, the much feared 2026 crunch may not be as dire as previously thought. Throughout this video, we will unpack why 2026 outlook is defying expectations. We'll examine the hype versus reality, dig into the data and everything that contradicts itself, and explore the unforeseen industry dynamics that created this twist. More importantly, we'll break down what it all means for those chasing an airline career and for the pilots already in the skies. Let's navigate through the turbulence with an analytical eye. We're not going to buy into sensationalism. We're just going to use solid evidence and insight into a job market that has everyone from airlines to aspiring aviators on the edge of their seats. The hype and the reality, unpacking the 2026 forecast. For much of the past few years, the narrative around U.S. pilot jobs was dominated by hype. There was a talk of a massive and worsening pilot shortage, almost to the point of hysteria. Industry reports and training academies sounded alarms that demand for pilots was skyrocketing well beyond supply. The FAA's aerospace forecast for 2025 to 2045 reinforced that demand would remain structurally high due to steady air traffic growth, waves of retirements, and career progression outpacing new entrants. Boeing's widely cited pilot and technician outlook likewise projected that 119,000 new pilots will be needed in North America over the next 20 years. Boeing warned that competition for qualified pilots will remain strong and encouraged aspiring pilots to start training to seize the coming opportunities. These messages fueled a belief that airlines faced a severe pilot deficit by the mid-2020s, a deficit so severe that in 2026 the system might strain to to keep airplanes staffed. On the ground, this translated into unprecedented hiring and pay raises. Airlines anticipating tough competition for talent inked new labor contracts with eye-popping salary increases. Some pilot pay rates jumped by 46% at major airlines and 86% at regional airlines since 2020. Stories of regional airlines offering hefty bonuses and fast tracks to the major became very common. The shortage narrative was so strong that it even spurred policy debates, like whether to raise the mandatory retirement age well beyond 65 to keep the veteran pilots flying longer. In essence, the hype promised a seller's market for pilots, where the demand seemed endless, and the career prospects ever expanding. Now enter reality. As 2026 approaches, cracks have appeared in some of those assumptions. Airline hiring, while still happening, has pulled well back from its peak. Consider this. U.S. airlines hired over 13,000 new pilots in 2022 and another 12,000 in 2023 during the post-pandemic hiring frenzy. But in 2024, the total hires fell to about 4,834, a number that might seem disappointing, but during normal times, this figure reflects actually a pretty good year. By mid-2025, as we talked about, only 2,190 pilots have been hired at the major carriers. These figures mark a return toward pre-pandemic hiring averages. It's a far cry from the runaway growth that many expected to continue. The reality is that the pilot job market is stabilizing rather than exploding. Even the forecasted retirement surge has shifted in time. Industry analysis initially warned that 2026 would see an all-time high in pilot retirement, exacerbating the shortage. But updated forecasts now indicate the retirement wave will happen around 2031 instead. Over the next 15 years, from 2025 to 2040, about 42,000 U.S. airline pilots will reach the mandatory retirement age of 65. Instead of one dramatic spike in 2026, retirements are expected to be a steady flow, providing a fairly steady flow of opportunity for younger job seekers. As FAPA's Tim Jenk explains, this timeline adjustment is huge. It suggests that the crunch point can be managed over a longer period rather than hitting it all at once next year. Furthermore, recent analysis by consulting firm Oliver Wyman reveals a narrowing of the projected pilot shortage gap. The outlook for North America's pilot shortfall has improved compared to a year ago, thanks to a healthier supply of new pilots and some tempering of demand. Oliver Wyman's latest figures project the gap between pilot supply and demand in 2032 to shrink to around 13,300 pilots, down from a previously forecasted 17,000, a 23% improvement. And remember that earlier dire prediction of 24,000 pilot shortfall in 2026? Well, that was based on last year's model. With the recent changes in hiring and training, the worst case 2026 gap may not live up to the hype. In fact, the U.S. pilot shortage, while still real, appears very much less severe than anticipated as we head into 2026. The industry's rapid response, more training capacity, better pay, and strategic adjustments have altered the equation. In summary, the hype promised an ever-intensifying pilot shortage crescendo in 2026. But the reality unfolding is more nuanced. Demand for pilots remains high, yet it is no longer growing unchecked. Supply is catching up in surprising ways. We have to recalibrate our expectations. 2026 will likely not be a doomsday scenario of empty cockpits, but rather another chapter in a long-term cycle of pilot staffing challenges. Significant, but manageable. Now, let's dig deeper into the numbers behind this shift and see what's really going on by the digits. The numbers don't lie, or do they? Deconstructing the data. To truly understand the 2026 outlook, we need to scrutinize the numbers behind the headlines. Data can reveal truths, but if taken out of context, it can be very misleading. Let's break down the key metrics. Projected pilot demand versus supply. A widely cited forecast, Oliver Wyman previously estimated a 24,000 pilot shortage by 2026 and a continuing shortfall through the decade. That alarming figure grabbed attention, but it's important to note it was a projection assuming trends at the time. Updated analysis now suggests a smaller gap. By 2032, the shortfall is expected to be closer to 13,300 pilots for North America. This improvement hints that interventions are working. Either supply has grown, demand has slowed down, or both. We'll explore why in the next section. It's a reminder that numbers don't lie, but they can change with new data. FAA and industry forecasts. The FAA's aerospace forecast doesn't give a precise shortage number, but emphasizes that pilot demand will remain remain structurally high for decades. This is backed by predictions of steady air travel growth through 2045 and thousands of retirements looming. Boeing's long-term outlook echoes this, projecting 119,000 pilot hires needed in North America by 2044, about 6,000 per year on average. Likewise, Airbus and other manufacturers foresee airline fleets doubling over the next 20 years, implicitly requiring a doubling in pilot ranks. Though all these forecasts underscore high demands, but they also assume industries will find ways to meet it through training, career incentives, etc. None of the credible forecasts suggest demand will simply vanish. Rather, the debate is about how large the gap will be and for how long. Government labor projections. For a grounded perspective, consider the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics outlook. The BLS projects employment of airline and commercial pilots to grow about 4% from 2024 to 2034, roughly in line with the average for all occupations. That might sound modest compared to the shortage talk, but it reflects a baseline scenario. Crucially, the Labor Statistics Bureau estimates about 18,200 pilot jobs opening each year over the decade, mainly due to retirements and workforce exits, rather than new growth. In other words, even a normal scenario, tens of thousands of pilots need to be trained and hired in the coming years to replace those leaving. The Bureau of Labor Statistics data doesn't explicitly scream shortage, but it does quantify a significant continuous demand, about 18,000 vacancies annually that must be filled to keep the system running. If training pipelines and hiring keep up with that, the market stays in equilibrium. If not, that's where a shortage appears. Recent hiring statistics. Let's examine recent actual hiring, a reality check against forecasts. As we talked about earlier, 2022 and 2023 saw record pilot hiring, about 13,000 plus pilots each year, as airlines feverishly rebuilt staff post-COVID. By 2024, hiring receded to roughly 5,000 new pilots, and 2025 is on track for a similar number, or slightly lower. These recent numbers align with what many experts consider a sustainable long-term pace, around 5,000 new airline pilots hired each year. It's a very realistic figure for a healthy market. So, while the extraordinary hiring of 2022 and 23 has not continued at that peak, the current hiring rate is actually on par with historical norms and what's needed annually. Remember, the Bureau of Labor Statistics about 18,000 openings across all commercial pilot jobs, which include a lot of non-airline positions. The dramatic swing in hiring illustrates how the industry overshot during the rebound and is now correcting course. Pilot production and training pipeline. One of the biggest shifts in the data comes from the supply side, the number of new pilots being trained and certified. The FAA has been issuing airline transport pilots licenses at a record pace. In 2022, the U.S. hit a modern record for new pilot certificates. In 2023, shattered another record with 11,225 new airline transport pilot certificates issued. This figure exceeded airline demand for new pilots in that year. For context, 11,000 new airline qualified pilots in 1 year is more than double the annual hires in the now normal market. It indicates that flight schools and training programs ramped up output to meet the perceived shortage and perhaps even overshot in the short term. Additionally, there are currently over 93,000 active certified flight instructors in the US, a talent pipeline 20% larger than pre-pandemic, which helps replenish the pilot ranks. This surge in pilot training is no accident. It's a direct response to airlines' hiring promises and salary hikes. The numbers show that America does not have a pilot training problem. Supply has been increasing. In fact, the Airline Pilots Association, ALPA, has argued that America does not have a pilot supply problem at all, pointing to these record-breaking pilot production stats as evidence. Retirement numbers. On the flip side, we must consider how many pilots are leaving. We've seen that about 42,000 airline pilots will retire in the next 15 years, which averages to about 2,800 per year, with variation from year to year. Earlier forecasts expected a sharp peak, a spike of perhaps 4,000 in 2026 when many baby boomers aged out. But now the peak is anticipated around 2031. If retirements are roughly 3,000 per year in the late 2020s and airlines hire about 5,000 per year, that net adds about 2,000 pilots annually to cover growth in flying. That aligns decently with projected air traffic growth rate. The revised retirement timeline has eased immediate pressure, but it also means retirements will stay high well into the 2030s, keeping hiring needs elevated over a longer period. In deconstructing these numbers, a pattern emerges. The pilot shortage is not a black and white story. The data can be interpreted differently depending on your perspective. By one set of numbers, we see a shortfall, for example, thousands of flights unstaffed if we don't train enough pilots by 2026, hence the 24,000 gap figure often quoted. But another set of numbers, we see balance or even surplus. If we look at record pilot graduations outpacing current hiring, as ALPA highlights, suggesting plenty of qualified pilots are available. Both views have some truth. The key is timing and distribution. In 2022 and 2023, demand momentarily far exceeded supply, hence the rapid hiring. By 2025 to 2026, supply and demand are moving closer into alignment. That's good news in avoiding meltdowns, but it also means the easy hiring bonanza for pilots may be gone. The long-run need for new pilots remains enormous, tens of thousands over the next decade, but the market may oscillate between tight and loose as it seeks equilibrium. Numbers don't lie, but they require context. The 2026 job market will be shaped by how these figures interact. With the data in hand, let's explore why the outlook shifted, the unforeseen forces and strategic moves that brought us to this surprisingly calmer point. Behind the shock, unforeseen industry dynamic. What caused the pilot job market's trajectory to veer off from the expected course? Well, the answer lies in a series of unforeseen, or at least underappreciated, industry dynamics that have unfolded in the past couple of years. These factors turned what could have been a full-blown 2026 crisis into a more nuanced situation. Surge in pilot supply due to pay and perks. The simplest economic dynamic is at play. When pilot pay and benefits shot up, more people flocked to become pilots. Major airlines and regionals offered huge raises, better work rules, and bonuses to attract and retain pilots. This made the profession more enticing, despite high training costs. Consequently, flight schools saw record enrollment. Many career changers and young aspirants decided it was well worth the investment, seeing airlines desperate to hire. The result, as we saw, FAA pilot certifications hit record highs in 2022 and 2023. Oliver Wyman noted substantially more airline transport pilot licenses being issued post-pandemic than before. The allure of high salaries, for example, new regional first officers now making what captains did a few years ago, and improved career prospects, quick upgrades, flow-through agreements to majors, rapidly expanded the pool of qualified pilots, narrowing the shortage. Essentially, the market self-corrected faster than many anticipated. High demand drove higher wages, which in turn stimulated higher supply. Airline strategic capacity management. On the demand side, airlines didn't passively await disaster. They took action to mitigate the shortage. A critical yet less glamorous dynamic was the scaling back of regional flying. During the height of the pilot shortage, major carriers faced severe staffing issues at their regional partners, the smaller airlines that operate feeder flight. To cope, the big airlines cut dozens of regional routes, particularly those served by 50-seat jets, and concentrated their limited pilots on larger aircraft and busier routes. As a result, U.S. regional flight activity is still far below pre-pandemic levels. In 2025, regional airlines are flying only about 67% of the block hours that they did in 2019, and the smallest regional jets, 50-seaters, are only at about 33% of their old utilization. In contrast, mainline flights on bigger jets with 100-plus seats are nearly 95% restored. This shift, essentially doing less with more on the regional side, artificially constrained pilot demand. Oliver Wyman points out that if airlines tried to fully restore regional flying to 2019 levels, they'd suddenly need about 6,000 additional pilots, which would instantly widen the gap again. For now, airlines have chosen to leave the capacity part, mitigating the pilot crunch. This strategic reduction was unforeseen by many analysts initially. It's a key reason the shortage hasn't been as catastrophic as feared in 2026. Aircraft delivery bottlenecks. Another sneaky factor affecting pilot demand is the pace of new aircraft deliveries. Several U.S. airlines have massive orders for new jets, for growth and fleet renewal, which would typically require hiring even more pilots. However, both Boeing and Airbus have faced production delays in recent years due to supply chain issues, etc. In some cases, airlines had to slow down pilot hiring simply because the planes they were planning to crew weren't arriving on schedule. For example, if Airline X expected 20 new jets and hired pilots in advance, a delay might leave those pilots on the ground, While this is a short-term and external factor, it's part of the story. Demand for pilots is partly tied to the aircraft in service. If deliveries slip into 2026 and 2027, the need to staff those jets also shifts rightward. This dynamic wasn't part of early pilot shortage forecasts, which assumed more aggressive fleet growth by mid-decade. It's a subtle factor that contributed to tempering the 2026 outlook. Evolving retirement patterns. We've highlighted the revised retirement forecast, but what caused that change? Well, some dynamics include demographic shifts and policy moves. First, the pilot workforce age distribution might be different than assumed. Perhaps fewer pilots than expected are hitting 65 in 2026, with a larger cohort approaching that age just a bit later. Second, the industry saw early retirements in 2020. Many senior pilots took buyouts during the pandemic downturn. Those early exits may have effectively pulled some retirements forward, easing the later bulge. Third, there's been intense debate about raising the retirement age to 67 to alleviate the shortage. And while not enacted as of 2025, the mere possibility may have influenced forecasting scenarios. If Congress eventually allowed pilots to fly 2 extra years, the retirement wave would spread out more thinly. Even without it, talk of it reflects that stakeholders are looking for ways to soften the impact. In short, the retirement crunch has not gone away, but it's been managed and re-estimated with better data, reducing the shock factor for 2026. Regulatory and training changes. In response to the shortage narrative, various stakeholders have floated changes to training requirements, like revisiting the FAA's 1,500-hour rule for airline pilots and boosting training capacity. While the 1,500-hour rule remains intact in the US, airlines have forged creative pathways to build pilot experience faster. For example, cadet programs, partnerships with flight schools, and the restricted ATP program that allows reduced hours for military or college grads. These initiatives aren't unforeseen, but their impact has grown recently. They are part of why more pilots are reaching airline qualification levels sooner, helping bridge the gap. Additionally, the FAA and industry have been vigilant on safety, no corners cut despite the crunch, which means quality of training stays high even as quantity increases. This concerted effort to expand the pilot pipeline in a responsible way was necessary, and it worked well enough to alter the shortage trajectory by 2026. Market spoilage and sentiment. An interesting social dynamic noted by experts is that the post-pandemic hiring spree somewhat spoiled aspiring pilots. Back in 22 and 23, it was almost too easy to get hired. Airlines were so desperate that the time from flight instructor to airline right seat hit record lows, and bonuses were plentiful. Many new pilots came to expect that as the new norm. Now, as hiring has normalized, there's a psychological correction happening. Prospective pilots realize they might not get multiple job offers the moment they hit minimum hours. They may need to interview, network, and be patient. This cooling of exuberance could slightly dampen the rush of entrants, though so far interest remains high. It's a soft factor, but sentiment can influence how many people enter training or stick with it. The industry messaging is adjusting from "we need you now" to "we will need you continuously, but do it right." That tonal shift is part of the surprise. The urgency is dialed back for now, which no one could have expected a couple of years ago. All these dynamics combine to produce a shock absorber effect for the 2026 pilot job market. The shortage wasn't solved overnight, but these factors prevented the worst case scenario. Airlines showed they can adapt operations to pilot availability, albeit by sacrificing some service in smaller markets. Pilots responded to financial incentives in droves, boosting supply. External constraints like aircraft availability inadvertently gave breathing room, and ongoing adjustments in forecasts and training ensured the issue is being actively managed rather than ignored. One caveat: many of these mitigating factors are temporary or have side effects. For instance, airlines can't inadvertently leave regional routes unserved. There is pressure to restore connectivity, and if they do, pilot demand will jump again. The influx of new pilots is fantastic, but it raises questions about having enough instructors, simulator capacity, or causing future oversupply if hiring slows too much. In other words, the dynamic that eased the 2026 crunch could set the stage for new challenges by 2028 or 2030. The industry will need to continuously balance these forces, but as of now, the once bleak 2026 outlook has been moderated by those unforeseen circumstances. There's a positive development for stability, but it comes with implications for different stakeholders, especially those who pinned their hopes on either a perpetual shortage or an immediate huge need. Let's turn to what this all means for the people at the heart of it, aspiring pilots and those currently flying. What this means for aspiring pilots, a reality check. If you're an aspiring pilot in the US, you've likely been following the buzz about pilot hiring. You might have started training with dreams of walking into a major airline in like 2 years, given all the talk of shortages. Well, it's time for a reality check, but an encouraging one. The outlook for new pilots is still bright, but it's more realistic than some of the hype suggested. Here's what this surprising 2026 market means for those aiming to join the profession. Number 1, there are opportunities aplenty, but you'll need to earn them. The slowdown in hiring from its peak doesn't mean airlines have stopped hiring. It means they've returned to a more typical pace. Thousands of pilots will still be hired each year. Major airlines are still opening new hire classes and have seats to fill on their roster. For example, United, American, Delta, and others hired around 5,000 new pilots in 2024, and similar numbers are expected as we finish up 2025. Moreover, recall that 42,000 airline pilots will retire over the next 15 years. That's a huge turnover that must be replenished. Airlines are going to need many new pilots in the coming years to replace retirees and to crew their slowly growing fleets as travel demand rises. In short, the jobs will be there. However, you might not see the frenzied hiring bonuses or ultra-fast promotions that recent grads in 2022 and 2023 enjoyed. Expect a competitive but fair job market, one where having the right qualifications, a good training record, and perseverance will pay off. Number 2, the importance of quality training and experience is higher than ever. In a market that's normalized, airlines can afford to be a bit choosier, unlike when they were scrambling to snatch up anyone with a minimum hours and a pulse. This means, as an aspiring pilot, you should focus on building a strong foundation. Get those flight hours, earn additional ratings, and gain diverse experience where you can. Tim Jenk of FAA advises young pilots to use any wait time productively, build hours, and acquire ratings and endorsements that make you more attractive to employers. Becoming a flight instructor, or CFI, is a tried and true path. The traditional path of CFI to right seat at a regional is still in effect, Jenk notes. Flight instructing not only builds hours, but hones your skills and demonstrates professionalism. With the market shifting, the pilots who excel in training and skill building will stand out. The days when airlines might waive some requirements just to get bodies in the cockpit are waning. So take the time to polish your craft. Airlines will still hire plenty of pilots, but they'll favor those who are truly ready. Number 3, networking and persistence matter. During the peak shortage, it might have seemed like simply having a pulse and a commercial license was enough to get hired. Now, the industry is reverting to its norm, a tight-knit community. Who you know can be an extremely important question in aviation hiring. Aspiring pilots should attend job fairs, join aviation organizations, and seek mentors. Many airlines have flow programs or partnerships with particular flight schools and regionals. Plug into those pipelines if you can. The idea is not to discourage you, but to remind you that building a career often involves more than just racking up hours. It's also about showing enthusiasm, professionalism, and making connections. Thankfully, today there are many initiatives, scholarships, outreach by pilots associations, etc., that welcome new talent. So network wisely and don't be disheartened if the first application doesn't land a job. Persistence is key. Number 4, don't bank on a perpetual shortage. Be prepared for cycles. One clear lesson from the past few years is how cyclical the aviation industry can and will be. We went from a lost decade, roughly 2000 to 2010, with a glut of pilots and few jobs to a roaring shortage in the late 2010s and early 2020s, and now it's normalizing again. Aspiring pilots should plan their finances and career with the understanding that aviation has its ups and downs. For instance, when you do get that airline job, live within your means initially. Don't assume unlimited overtime or quick upgrades. Build a cushion. That way, if hiring slows or an economic downturn hits, and historically downturns do happen, affecting aviation jobs, you can ride it out. The current forecasts are very optimistic about long-term demand. Boeing even says aspiring pilots who begin training today will be well positioned by the time they finish. But as we see, the timing and intensity of demand can and will change. Flexibility and resilience will serve you well. The good news is that even with cycles, aviation generally grows over time. More passengers, more planes, eventually more pilots needed. So if you stay the course, odds are in your favor. Number 5. Leverage the improved training landscape. On a positive note, the recent pilot shortage fears have led to improvements that directly benefit new pilots. There are more training scholarships and airline cadet programs now than ever. Airlines like United, through Aviate, JetBlue, and others have pathways that can help you go from student pilot to airline first officer in a more structured way. Flight schools have invested in new simulators and aircraft. As one academy noted, even purchasing new trainers to reduce downtime. There are also legislative efforts to potentially help with training costs or student loan support. So take advantage of these resources. If high costs was a barrier, seek out the programs that mitigate it. The industry wants you to succeed. They will need pilots, just over a longer horizon. So many stakeholders are offering a helping hand. In essence, for aspiring pilots, the 2026 U.S. job market outlook is encouraging but calls for diligence. Gone is the automatic pilot shortage hype that implied you could walk into a job. Instead, we have a stable demand that rewards those who put in the effort to meet high standards. You should feel optimistic. The career remains a promising one, with airlines actively hiring and projecting strong demand for pilots for decades. Just temper the optimism with realism. Approach your training and job search like a professional from day one. If you do that, you'll be ready to seize the opportunity that 2026 and beyond holds, no matter how the winds may shift. Current pilots, navigating the shifting skies. If you're already a pilot, whether at a regional airline, a major carrier, or elsewhere in the industry, the evolving 2026 outlook has implications for your career strategy and daily work life as well. The surprise twist in the job market means you'll need to navigate changing conditions. Here's what to consider as you chart your course through the shifting skies of a post-shock pilot market. Number 1. Enjoy the gains, but stay adaptable. The recent years have been extraordinary for pilot pay and work conditions. As mentioned, many pilots saw substantial raises. Captains at major airlines are up 46% in pay since 2020, and regional pilots an 86% jump in some cases. New contracts have improved quality of life provisions, scheduling, and benefits. These gains are largely locked in through union agreements for the next few years, a direct result of the pilot shortage giving labor strong negotiating power. Current pilots should certainly enjoy the improved compensation and respect they've earned. However, with the job market normalizing, don't expect the same breakneck pace of improvements going forward. The leverage has balanced out a bit. Airlines now see pilot supply catching up, so future contract negotiations might be tougher. Staying adaptable is key. Be willing to upgrade to a new aircraft or bid different bases if it helps your career. The easy opportunities like quick captain upgrades or instant hiring at a major might slow down. So positioning yourself smartly becomes important. In short, appreciating this golden moment but plan for a more typical environment ahead. Number 2, the seat shuffle will slow. Plan your career moves accordingly. During the height of the shortage, we saw unprecedented movement. First officers at regionals jumping to the majors in record time, and junior captains at majors getting chances to move to wide body or captain seats much faster than usual. That incredible advancement is likely to taper off. With retirement spread out more evenly till 2031 and hiring at a steady rate, the career progression ladder will lengthen a bit again. For a current pilot, that means you may spend more time in your current seat or status than you might have if you were hired during the frenzy. This isn't necessarily negative. Stability can be good, but it affects planning. For example, if you're a first officer at a regional airline hoping to jump to a legacy carrier, you might face a bit more competition now that the initial vacuum has been filled. Keep an eye on hiring trends and be proactive. Continue to build hours, maybe upgrade to captain at the regionals if the opportunity comes, even if your end goal is elsewhere. That PIC experience is very valuable. For major airline pilots, expect that movement to coveted positions, like the wide-body captains, will be paced by retirements, which are steady but not skyrocketing until later in the decade. Patience and persistence remain virtues in pilot careers. Number 3, be prepared for the return of a talent buffer at regionals. One of the most painful aspects of the pilot shortage for airlines was the depletion of regional airline pilots. Majors hired so many that regionals were left understaffed. As hiring stabilizes, regionals might start being able to retain pilots longer or even attract new ones more easily. Some regionals have dramatically increased starting pay to $90,000 for first officers in some cases, and offered retention bonuses. With majors hiring a bit less frantically, the pressure on regional pilot staffing could ease. For current pilots, this has two sides. If you're at a regional, you might not get scooped up by a major as quickly as you hope, but your own airline might be able to run a more stable operation. Fewer cancellations due to crew shortages, better schedules for you. If you're at a major, be aware that the flow of experienced crew from regionals might slow, which could prompt majors to adjust recruiting tactics. For example, more direct entry hiring from military or overseas. In any case, stability in the regional sector is a net positive for the profession. It means fewer pilots flying on the ragged edge of exhaustion and a more orderly career progression for everyone. Just remain aware if the industry suddenly decides to ramp up regional flying again. Those parked 50-seaters, a mini hiring boom could reemerge to staff them. Current pilots should keep an ear to the ground about their company's growth plans. Number 4, secure the present. Future-proof your skills. With technology evolving, new aircraft types, increasingly automated systems, pilots should continuously train and adapt. The current market normalization gives a bit of breathing room to invest in your skills without the chaos of constant turnover. Take the extra simulator session, pursue a type rating on your own if it makes you more marketable, or cross-train if your airline offers programs. For instance, some pilots diversify by also flying in the guard/reserves or getting instructor qualifications. While single-pilot commercial operations or pilotless airliners are not near-term realities, the discourse around them may grow by the 2030s. Staying technologically savvy and adaptable will ensure you remain competitive as the industry evolves. Moreover, if you plan to move up to a larger airline or different sector, cargo or corporate, consider that in your current decisions. Maybe stay on an airframe that gives relevant experience, or take on leadership roles like the safety committee. These bolster your resume. The idea is to treat this period of stability as a time to fortify your career for whatever comes next. Number 5, keep an eye on industry negotiations and policies. As a current pilot, your career can be directly affected by decisions on things like retirement age, duty time rules, and training requirements. The debate on raising the airline pilot retirement age to 67 is one to watch. It has not been implemented, and pilot unions like ALPA strongly oppose it, citing safety and labor concerns. But if it ever were, it could temporarily slow down retirements, affecting career progression. Conversely, if a shortage rears up again, airlines might push for changes like reducing the 1,500-hour rule for new pilots. Unlikely without broad support, but it's worth keeping an eye on. Stay informed and involved with your union or professional associations. They often have the latest intel on regulations that could impact your hiring or career longevity. Also, note that airline contrast cycles will continue. The big 4 US carriers all inked new deals by 2023. By the late 2020s, they'll renegotiate again. The balance of power at that time, shortage versus surplus, will influence those talks, which in turn affects pay and quality of life. As a pilot, be aware of those macro factors. These macro factors help you make better personal decisions, like timing a move or deciding how long to stay in the game. In conclusion, current pilots in 2026 find themselves in a much more favorable position than pilots a decade ago. But the environment is no longer rapidly tilting in their favor as it was in the recent shortage peak. You have benefited from the intense demand of the early 2020s, higher pay, quick advancement, job security, and those benefits are largely here to stay. Now, as the industry evens out, your task is to consolidate those gains and navigate a steadier course. The surprise of the 2026 outlook is that it's not a white-knuckle ride after all, but rather a sustainable climb. That's good for safety, good for airlines, and ultimately good for pilots. Long-term career health. Just remember that aviation is dynamic. Stay flexible, continue to learn, and be ready to adjust your heading when the winds change. After all, a pilot's journey is rarely a straight line, but with the right preparation, you can handle any turbulence ahead. Let's talk about 2026 and beyond. The US pilot job market predictions for 2026 have indeed turned out to be full of surprises. What was once billed as a crisis is looking more like an inflection point, a moment where industry efforts and markets' response converge to stave off the worst outcomes. We unpacked the hype versus reality, dissected the data driving these predictions, and uncovered the industry maneuvers that altered the trajectory. We also translated these findings into practical insight for the people most affected, the next generation of pilots and those currently in the cockpit. To recap, 2026 will not be the dramatic climax of a pilot shortage saga that some thought it would be. But neither is it the end of the story. The forces of supply and demand are still at play, just in a lot more balanced duet. Airlines, regulators, and training institutions will have to remain vigilant to ensure we don't swing back into a severe shortage or overshoot in a surplus. For aspiring pilots, the path to the flight deck is still wide open. Just be ready to walk that path with dedication rather than sprinting through an open door. For current pilots, the profession is more rewarding than ever, and with prudent planning, it can remain a fulfilling career through whatever comes. All information in this video was drawn from recent incredible sources: the FAA forecast statistics, Boeing and Airbus's outlooks, airline announcements, and labor market analyses by experts. If you want the full list of sources, you'll find it at the bottom of the description. By sticking to the data and avoiding sensationalism, we've gotten a clear, analytical picture of the 2026 job market. It's a picture of cautious optimism and dynamic adaptation. Perhaps not as headline-grabbing as shortage apocalypse, but far more useful for planning a career or running an airline. As we move beyond 2026, one thing is certain: the aviation industry will continue to need talented pilots, and those pilots will continue to navigate not just the skies, but the ebb and flow of the job market, armed with the knowledge of current trends and lessons from recent years. Both pilots and airlines can prepare for a smoother flight into the future. The outlook has surprises, yes, but it also has opportunity. And now you know what to expect. I wish you safe flying and good luck on your journey wherever it may take you in this ever-evolving aviation landscape. That's all I got for you today. One final reminder is to check out the Movember fundraising that I've got linked down below. It would mean the world to me if you would even consider donating $1. That's all I got for you. I will see you next week, or maybe before that. See ya!